of Sefer Shemot ends with God's presence resting on the Jewish people. That whole concept of God's presence resting upon us is very difficult to understand. What does that even mean, that there's a presence of God? God is not a physical thing. So how can we understand what it means for it to rest? And even more so, why is it that building the Mishkan, which is the last thing that we did at the end of Sefer Shemot, how did that cause God's presence to rest? What's the relationship between building a physical building full of gold and silver and beautiful artistic beauty and God's presence resting? Wouldn't learning Torah or tefillot or some sort of spiritual leaving of this world cause God's presence, not a physical building? So I think in order to understand this, we have to look at the way that our sages see the actual building of the Mishkan. There's some midrashim, and there's a theme throughout the midrashim that say that the reason why God asked us to build the Mishkan is because God wanted He wanted a diraba tachtonim. He wanted a place to dwell in this world. And the Midrash goes on to explain that when God created this world, there was this separation. God was on high and the world was below, and there was something that was missing in the world that God created. And that missing element that God felt at the end of creation was filled by the building of the Mishkan. So much so that the words of the Torah actually give us that sense as well. We know that the end of each day of creation ends with Vayer Vayivoker Yom Sheni, Vayer Vayivoker Yom Shlishi. It was the first night, the second night, the third night, the fourth night. And then we get to the seventh day, and the seventh day is Shabbat. Once we finish building the Mishkan, the Torah says, Vayihi Bayom Hashmini. It was on the 8th day. Now, it was the 8th day of the month at that time, but it definitely reaches back to creation. It says there was the first, second, third. Creation had a pause and was fulfilled at the end by the 8th day of creation, which was the building of the Mishkan. So in other words, us building the Mishkan is a partnership with God, is seen by God as a partnership with Him in creation. And really there is nothing more that we can do that's more godly than creating. God is the creator, and He created us. And what allows us to be partners with Him in this world is how we create, how we bring into fruition. The Torah tells us that each one of the artisans that were part of the building of the Mishkan, a Ruach Hashem, a Spirit of God, entered within them. The Rambam, when explaining how Nevuah works, says that the lowest level of Nevuah, of prophecy, actual prophecy, is a Ruach Hashem, a Spirit of God entering in somebody to do something incredible, to create. And the reason why is because that is how we partner with God in this world, via the mechanism of being creators. Now, if we be creators and separate from God, obviously that does not partner with God, but rather that creates a separation. But if we use this power which God gave us in order to do good, in order to build upon the world that God created in the 7 days of creation, that is not a separation, but rather a partnership. And that in itself is what God was looking for when He created the world. Not a world which is separate from God, but a God in which we can partner, a world which we can partner with Him in order to create something together. And there's no greater manifestation of the divine in this world than people acting divine. That in itself is the presence of God. And that's what happened when we built the Mishkan. You had a group of people that acted divine, lived within that Spirit of God, and that in itself was a manifestation of God's presence. Shabbat Shalom.